Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock and ready to go. Welcome to the 2021 GSHE Virtual Business Meeting and Conference. We hope you enjoy our presentation. Please be sure that you are muted and the video is off. But in this case, Ed would like to see you, so it's your choice. Questions will be taken at the end of presentation using the chat box. And I will monitor that afterwards. It is my pleasure and honor to present Ed Munoz. His presentation will be about how to conduct oral history interviews. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen here with you. I was hoping to post the notes in
the chat.
In the chat, but I can't, for whatever reason, I can't figure that out at this point in time. So we'll just kind of go from there. But I want to thank the organizing committee for all the fine work they've been doing with this virtual conference. And it also for the chance to, for inviting me to speak today. And thank you all for joining me today and to talk about oral histories. I'm going to kind of give you the basics on how to do this, even give you some of the theory behind oral histories, why we do this. And then I'm going to also kind of blend this in with this project that I've been developing over the past year and a half. And it's a project called Construyendo Latinidad, or Constructing Latino Identity. All right. I also want to give thanks to Matt Basso. He's an associate professor in history at the University of Utah. He's been a pretty good mentor to me in terms of how to conduct oral histories. I kind of, it's similar to doing in-depth interviewing in sociology. I'm a sociologist by training, and I'm in the ethnic studies division currently. But in any case, Matt helped me out, taught me some of the nuances between oral histories and in-depth interviewing. So with that, I'll get started. And folks can see the slides okay. Kathy, is everything good?
Yes, everything's good.
All right. Oral history is nothing new. I like this image that I found a while back. And this is, kind of indigenous folks kind of providing their their youth, histories and about, their origin stories or whatever. I'm assuming this, but we have some similar kinds of practices as well. One of the ones that I'm always kind of interested in, particularly when we talk about Latino culture, is like corridos. Corridos about different famous events like the Mexican War, those types of things. But those are also examples of oral history. So we but today we also kind of think of oral histories as kind of a research method. And like I mentioned before, it's kind of like an in-depth interview. It's also a recorded memoir. We try to, it's best to do a recording, audio, video if you can, but audio for sure. And then we also want to transcribe those audio, video recordings. I'm going to show you some of the easy ways to do this today. With technology, things are becoming a lot more easier. And I'll talk about that throughout the presentation, okay? Now, one of the other things that I want to kind of mention a few oral history databases in case people are interested as well. I'm sure each state has oral history databases. It just kind of depends on what the different topics or whatever that people have been able to conduct over the years. Right now, there's a national database that started maybe about 20 years ago with a kind of World War II veterans oral history project, I believe. And this is the Voces Oral History Center that's housed at the University of Texas. And I went to the University of Texas a couple summers ago to learn more about doing oral history research as well. It's real easy. Just go ahead and if you want to Google it, Voces Oral History. And this is a national database, and it has probably I know it has over 1,000 oral histories from, I think every state in the United States is represented. However, it's most of the interviews, as you can imagine, are from places that where Latinos are really heavily concentrated, like the American Southwest, New York, and then also kind of Florida, and particularly Miami as well. But in any case, those are there for your use as well, your consumption. They have different topics as well, okay? So an oral history interview is an experience of a unique two-way communication, a never to be duplicated encounter between persons exchanging information through questions and answers, all right? And to give you another example, La Cultura Hispanic Heritage Oral History Project was completed in the 1980s in Wyoming. And this is a database that I've been using recently in order to do some of my research. Again, if you just kind of Google that, La Cultura Hispanic Heritage Oral History, you'll be able to access that as well. That's the nice thing about these databases. People can access them for their own personal use as well. And that's one of the things behind oral histories that makes them very kind of nice to work with, okay? So oral histories, they kind of help us create and shape meaning of different particular events, individuals, families, okay? Provide us firsthand information rather than kind of going and looking at archives of newspapers or books or memoirs and things like that. Lots of times these oral histories are structured. They can also be open-ended as well. They're collaborative in the sense that it's a collaboration between the interviewer and the narrator, and probably some other institution or organization that is conducting the project for a particular reason, okay? It helps us create context as well of certain historical periods. As I mentioned, this La Cultura Hispanic Heritage Project was conducted in the 1980s. Voces has a very long, a wider range of time frame as well. And it helps us share authority. It gives folks that we're interviewing their voice is kind of the authoritative voice and not necessarily an expert like some, professor that's mainly, in the White Towers of the White Ivy Towers and things like that. And it provides unique information in addition to, what's out there in the newspapers and other historical accounts as well. And it's highly interdisciplinary. We kind of think of oral histories as, one of the main kind of methodologies for historians, but other disciplines use oral histories as well. Even within the medical field, they do a lot of oral history research in order to kind of, pinpoint some, like social determinants that cause disease and whatnot. One of the things that's going on at the University of Utah right now is they're collecting oral histories that have to deal with COVID. Okay, during the COVID era, let's document this. And so there's a special collection of oral histories now at the University of Utah that are having to dealing with, particularly with the COVID era, okay? Another database that I've been using that you can access as well is the Spanish-speaking Peoples in Utah Oral Histories database. This was completed in the 1970s. So again, with the different eras when these different databases, were archived and things like that. So you can kind of do some historical comparisons, all right, between these two different eras. And so for historians, oral histories provide an underlying current towards a history which is more personal, more social, and more democratic. Okay, we often kind of wonder, well, who writes history, And here we kind of have this collaboration with the writing of history, and not just kind of some expert, quote unquote, in the field, okay? So this kind of affects not only published history, but the process by which it is written, okay? For others, oral histories are remarkably teachable. I use these two databases in order to train my students here at the University of Utah and how to do oral histories. And they're helping me right now with my, not right now, but when I have my classes, particularly a class called U.S. Latino Diaspora, their class project is to conduct an oral history. And so they're remarkably teachable. They're a way to hear the voice and views of ordinary people. All right. Again, what we're usually accustomed to hearing is experts, political pundits, public officials, and they're the authorities on whatever kind of subject matter that is being discussed. Here we have ordinary people giving their expert, perspective or whatever on a particular event or individual or whatever. Compelling testimony in a big data-dominated world. We usually kind of rely on statistics to kind of help us navigate complex problems, but here we have people kind of giving their perspective, which can also help tell the story along with statistics as well. Okay, there are some limitations as you might imagine, with oral histories. The problem of sampling, you usually cannot sample or unless you have a big grant and a lot of people helping you, you're not going to be able to have a very large sample of individuals that you can interview. And it's more kind of a snowball sampling kind of thing. In other words, you are kind of trying to target a certain population, and even within that certain population, you ask one individual and then you kind of go from there. They might recommend other people to interview, those types of things as well. All right, so, and because of this, you don't kind of have data that is generalizable to the larger population, those types of things. So sampling is kind of one of the limitations. And oral histories are also based on memory recollection. And sometimes people may misremember. So you may have to kind of use other sources in order to kind of cross or to triangulate kind of what folks were trying to tell you and those types of things. And it does provide us some very valuable historical evidence as well. And despite these limitations, oral histories offer an invaluable way to gain information and knowledge about a person, place, event, or time that is not available in other sources. It helps us uncover unique stories of the past and the present. Okay, the story of the Romero family from California, okay, that you may not find in the regular history textbooks that are required for a particular class or whatever. It helps us interact with others through collecting their history as well. The more we interact, the more we can kind of gain better knowledge in order to kind of solve problems or just to share knowledge in those types of things. It also gives voice to people who would otherwise go unheard. And it also validates their perspectives and gives significance to the lives of those that don't have a chance to provide their perspective. Okay, and it also provides an understandable and very human leap for young people and newcomers to a community to the immediate present or recent past. These oral histories about Utah really helped me know the state of Utah a lot better, and particularly, the history of the Latino population here, with regards to why they first started migrating to Utah. The majority of folks that first came were from New Mexico. However, we had people from Texas, we had people from Mexico, and it kind of also correlates with certain historical events. The recruitment of labor, Mexican labor, after we, restricted labor from Central, Southern, and Eastern Europe and those types of things. Okay. And it's also a way to have fun. It is fun. I do have a great time interviewing individuals because it kind of gets to be kind of this, this really kind of nice conversation and whatnot. And I know my students, when I have them write their reflection papers at the end of the semester about their projects, almost all of them, okay, really speak to how much they really enjoyed the project and getting to know somebody that, lived in a different era and how things have changed over the years. So it becomes this way to have fun as well. Okay. I'm going to move to like processes and practices for conducting successful interviews. Okay. So early on, you have to kind of define your purpose and objectives for your project. And work needs to be, so there's a lot of work to be done before the interview. All right. You also kind of have to think about how you're going to get interviews transcribed. Transcribed interviews have a lot more permanence than audio video recordings, just because those don't last as long as the transcripts do. You have to figure out if you want to edit your audio and video recordings as well. And one of the reasons you may want to do that is because there might be a lot of dead space in interviews where, or maybe you got interrupted during an interview by something or someone or whatever, and you may want to edit those out as well. Okay. You also need to give your interviewee or the narrator. I want to use interviewee and narrator kind of interchangeably throughout. And you need to give them a chance to edit the interview as well. There might be something that they didn't want to really kind of go into an interview. And remember, oral histories are kind of done not only for your own personal kind of use, but for public consumption as well. So there might be things in there that folks don't want the public to know. So they have a chance to go ahead and take things out. They also have a chance to add some things or expand on something that they felt that they needed to clarify a bit more. You also need to get a release form from individuals for copyrights, okay? And then there's the final edit and corrections that you have to think about as well. So there's a lot of work that goes into this in order to do this well. And again, you need to kind of think about what you're going to do. Where are you going to store all of this material? Not only the audio video, are you going to use a cloud, a cloud system, whatever, a cloud storage, or are you just going to have it on your desktop? And if you have it on your desktop, how much space do you have, those types of things. And then what are you going to do with them? Are you going to distribute them? How are you going to distribute them? How are you going to get these stories out to other individuals besides kind of for your own personal use? Oral history projects can also focus on different subject matters. They can be individuals or families or other groups. I know, this is a genealogy association, so one of the primary objectives could be doing family histories, particularly, and you may want to restrict it to one family. All right. You could also do communities, neighborhoods, or cities or communities. And again, kind of relying on the GSHA, maybe we want to do oral histories with GSHA Utah chapter. That's kind of where I started at, but I'm starting to branch out, and I'll explain that more here in just a little bit, okay? You may just want to do organizations or movements as well, okay? People that lived during the Chicano movement, how did the Chicano movement impact individuals, and how has that impact influenced their lives over the years? And so you may want to kind of do focus your oral histories with individuals that kind of lived through that era. You can also kind of do occupations, activities, or common experiences. What was your experience during the COVID-19 pandemic? You may want to do oral histories on railroad workers. What were the difference between railroad workers in the 1930s versus railroad workers today? I'm sure there's vast differences in those occupations, thinking that it's almost kind of 70, 80 years, right? So to kind of illustrate this a little bit more, I want to talk a little bit now about the project that I've been developing. And first, I kind of started with the, it kind of came out of, well, it did come out of the Construyendo Latinidad in the Intermountain West project that I created. It was a traveling museum exhibit that I created. And this map is a map of the Dominguez Escalante route through, it started in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and went up through Western Colorado and up through northern and south central kind of Utah before it started going back into Arizona, and then all the way back to Santa Fe, okay? But I had read a little bit about this from previous research, and I was approached by the Wyoming State Archives and the Wyoming State Museum, officials from each of those organizations, and they asked me to help them revise their Hispanics in Wyoming traveling exhibit, which was a traveling exhibit that focused on Mexican-American history in the 20th century, which was cool. I really enjoyed looking at what they had. But I asked them if we could expand it to, beyond just the 20th century and look at the early beginnings of the Latino population in the Intermountain West and not just Wyoming. So I was kind of looking at this area, Utah, Montana, Idaho, and kind of northern Colorado, southern Colorado, kind of what we kind of recognize as the Intermountain West, even kind of like northern Arizona. All right. I wrote a paper, just published a paper on like Latino identity as well, and how these historical kinds of things have influenced how individuals choose particular labels over others and whatnot. And so I could probably share that with you, with the group later on as well. It just got published this summer, and so I'm pretty happy with it. But that's kind of where this project started. And over the years, I became aware of the different oral history project databases that helped me kind of publish the paper. And then about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I think Maria Garcia's invited me to a GSHA meeting on Saturday morning at the Family History Library over here at on the LDS property and whatnot. And I joined. So I went to the meeting, and I was like, wow, I could interview all these folks, that's kind of, so I kind of kept going to meetings, and I started talking to them about this project. And then I can't remember exactly when I joined, but in December, when they had elections, nobody wanted to run for president. And I think Margie said, Ed, you should run for president. And I felt a little pressure to run for president, so it would help me kind of recruit individuals to interview. So that's how I became the president of the GSHA Utah chapter. It's been a great experience. I have been interviewing some of the individuals in the organization as well as outside of the organization. And I've also I started talking to Bob about this as well, Craig, the national president. And we are planning we're hoping to kind of expand this project with the different chapters in the GSHA as well. So, but we've both been busy with our summer projects this year. And so I think we're going to try to hit it a little bit harder after the conference in order and I'll give you some more details here in a little bit, but that's kind of one of the things that I've been developing. So we want to have this kind of big database that will be accessible by all of the members in GSHA. There are a couple different models of how to do oral histories. One's the life review model, and the other is the subject topic model. I kind of blended these two together, and I can show you my interview questions afterwards. But basically, I'm kind of wanting to, examine how people, choose particular labels over other labels. Okay, like for instance, Hispanic versus Latino versus Latinx versus Chicano or Chicana as well. Okay. And that's that's kind of the subject, and I kind of know a lot about that already. But then I also want to get, I want to interview individuals and kind of look at chronological events to kind of see how those live kinds of experiences have helped them kind of choose a particular identity over the other. So I'm kind of blending the two together. Okay. The other thing you really need to think about when you're getting ready to do oral histories is think about the audience, your technologies, and where are you going to share this work, okay? Who's going to use the oral histories? The Construyendo Latinidad project, I'm assuming first and foremost that it will be individuals from the Genealogical Society of Hispanic America. However, that doesn't preclude other groups, other individuals from using the oral histories for research or just for their own interests or whatever, okay? And how will the histories be used and preserved? I'm in discussions with the University of Utah Marriott Library in order to archive the oral histories there, not only the audio video recordings, but also the transcribed audio video recordings as well, okay? And so you have to kind of really take stock of how you're going to do this. What kind of equipment do you need? What kind of sound quality are you going to There's a lot of kinds of equipment out there to produce high quality interviews that will last a long time, particularly if they're audio and video. Okay. And how are people going to be able to access this? Okay. Again, like I mentioned, is it going to all be stored on your computer, or are you going to have it in an archive that the public can access easily? All right. There's some ethical practices, okay, of oral history interviews that we need to really kind of pay attention to. Oral historians should inform interviewees about the nature and purpose of oral history interviewing in general and their interview specifically. Interviewees should know that they hold copyright to their interviews unless they transfer those rights via a release form. You can do a whole interview, and if folks don't sign the release form, then other people can't see it and other people can't use it. Okay, so most of the time people will go ahead and sign a release form, but that's something you have to keep in mind. What do you do with interviews that you don't have a release form for? Okay, so oral history should respect the interviewees and the integrity of the research. You shouldn't be trying to kind of cherry pick certain individuals to interview over others. Okay, everybody should have an equal kind of chance of participating in the project. I usually ask for volunteers, and I have a lot of people that have already volunteered. I have easier access to some individuals over others, and so that's kind of how I have been doing things. Okay, and sometimes it depends on who's available at what particular time. The oral historian should clearly state their intention regarding the plan, process, and final outcome of the interviews. Again, kind of what are you going to do with this? And during the interview, the interviewer should not mind for sound bites. You shouldn't be trying to kind of, egg on individuals to provide you something juicy, for kind of dramatic purpose or whatever, those types of things. That kind of biases your interviews, all right? So, and after the interview should give the narrator the option to edit the interview transcript, okay? Interviewers should avoid making promises that cannot be met, okay? For instance, we're going to publish a book. You don't know if you're going to publish a book yet, right? So don't make those kinds of promises. You might want to say that this is a kind of one of the goals that we're going to do, and if so, I will inform you of the process and how you can access these different artifacts that come out of the project. For long-term preservation and access, oral historians should use the best recording equipment available within their financial limits. Some tools are a lot easier than others. Less expensive than others. Okay, and the interviewer should be somebody that can sit quietly and listen. Is willing to let the interviewee express a contrary opinion without feeling compelled to contradict or re-educate. Okay, don't be judgmental. All right, that's another thing. Sometimes we'll, wow, this person said this, and I don't want to, it's kind of like today we're seeing this huge debate between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated and the reasons for this and that or whatever. And the best way to kind of move through these discussions is not to be judgmental, and realize that folks are going to have their own perspectives on why they do particular things and whatnot. The interviewer should not be afraid to break in occasionally with a question or a guiding comment, especially when the interview is kind of going off into tangents and things like that. Okay, and a good interview recognizes when an interviewee brings up an unplanned but valuable subject and who is able to pursue the new subject with questions. This is a real skill, okay? Because sometimes people will be glued to the interview guide or the interview questions, and when something kind of, that's something that's relevant that you didn't think about comes up, it's good to kind of just let those individuals talk about that and let that kind of flow with the interview as well. So there's a lot of work to do before the interview. You need to do some research with regards to the topic if you decide to do a topic. All right. Know your equipment, what kind of equipment you're going to use. Okay. And particularly, I've been using Zoom. Zoom has been pretty easy for us. And because you can record the interviews, I usually even set the pre-recording right offhand. And then if individuals don't want to be recorded, then I will stop the recording, okay? But there's other ways to do this. People have cameras and things like that. Again, right now I'm using Zoom, but I'm probably going to move to in-person interviews because it's more conducive. And so there's advantages to Zoom. It's easily accessible for individuals. However, some people are not good with technology. All right, and there's some things that we're still figuring out about Zoom ourselves, the seasoned veterans that kind of use this. Okay, in-person interviews are still the best, in my opinion, and hopefully this pandemic will ease to the point where we can do interviews without anybody being concerned about their health. And you want to create a conducive space. Lots of times individuals will want to do their interviews at home. All right, because that's where they're probably going to feel a lot more comfortable. One of the disadvantages of doing interviews at home, there's, sometimes there might be quite a few family members that might interrupt the interview as well. All right, I like to do interviews in a neutral space, if at all possible. And that way, like for instance, the Marmalade Library here, a couple blocks away from where I live, you can reserve rooms there for 2 hours, which gives you plenty of time to do an interview. And it's easily accessible as well. Be cautious of the length. My interviews, when I usually do interviews, they're usually an hour to 2 hours. Well, usually an hour to 90 minutes at tops. They can get to be longer, but just kind of plan for that. Make sure you have enough battery power in your devices. Always make sure you're charging those up, okay? And you always want to begin with the identifying information in your interview. I'm Ed Munoz. I am interviewing Kathy Romero for the Construyendo La Dignidad project conducted through the University of Utah on August 14th at 10 a.m. in the morning. Here at the University of Utah campus. So provide that kind of information up front, okay? So give you more context. Don't dominate, the interviewer shouldn't dominate the conversation, okay? The point isn't to show how much you know, okay? Keep your questions brief and to the point. Avoid asking yes or no questions and use more open-ended questions. So Kathy, could you tell me a little bit about yourself with regards to like where you were born, the date, year, were you born in New Mexico? Yes, okay. So there's ways to kind of structure your questions so that people can provide more information rather than just a yes or no answer, okay? And listen, that's the big thing about doing your interviews, listen, okay? So you're going to develop, before the interview, you'll develop an interview guide. It's always great to practice an interview with somebody. Even if the individual doesn't have any knowledge of the topic you're discussing, they can role play, all right? I have my students role play with the interview guide that we've developed, all right? And so they do a practice interview before they even interview one of the volunteers from GSHA. Archival considerations, I'll talk about here in just a little bit, as well as legal instruments and talk more about the use of oral histories. And again, kind of getting back to this Construyendo La Dignidad in the Intermountain West project, I'm working with the the Marriott Library with the University of Utah. And this is from their website, and it is an oral history project submission form. And since I'm the one that's kind of developing this project, I need to fill out some forms with them. Once I fill out the forms, then I can transfer the files that I have right now in my Dropbox, which is a cloud storage. I can transfer those to storage at the Marriott Library. And what's great about this is once we kind of start archiving these through the Marriott Library will also provide us a link that we can put like on the GSHA the GSHA webpage, and individuals can then click on that link and they'll have access to the different oral histories. All right. Again, I'm working with Bob, and we're going to start developing this with other chapters as well. In terms of how do you use these, I talked about transcripts already. You know, researchers, people can do research. This is the Digital Matters Lab at the University of Utah. And this lab helps individuals, helps research kind of create digital artifacts. For example, I can, with the oral histories that we're completing, we can pinpoint on a map, so to speak, where individuals, families, where they came from at first, and then kind of show where they moved to different places. And then you can also like choose, select transcripts from the oral histories to kind of pinpoint with each one of the marks on the map. Okay, and so you can kind of scroll over that little marker, and then you'll see a little excerpt from the oral history and things like that. So those are some things that you can create, and then you'll have it on the web, but you can also kind of use this information to do public talks with your organization, or to the library, or take it to elementary schools or junior highs and things like that. Okay, legal agreements. Okay, we are almost there, right, Kathy, with regards to time?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm almost finished. Okay, so inasmuch as the whole purpose of an oral history program is to make the information that is captured in interviews available to many users, not just to the interviewer, it is important that this availability be ensured by having the narrator sign a release to the information, and to do that as soon after the recording of the interview as possible. I like to do this beforehand. Okay, it's just maybe because of my discipline, we always kind of take care of this process beforehand, so that people know the purpose and objectives of the project, and whether or not we can audio, video record and things like that. The copyright allows us to reproduce the interview, make copies, allows us to make derivative works, like I was talking about, digital artifacts, including the transcript, print, or web-based articles, and audio, video programs. I've seen documentaries created with the use of oral histories as well. Okay, you can distribute copies by sale, rental, lease, and lending. You can perform the work publicly. Like I mentioned, you can kind of go on tour with this if you need to, and display the work publicly on the internet, so to speak. This is an example of a release form. I'm not going to go into this too much since we're running out of time, but you can see here that this is an oral history interview agreement, and it's on the University of Utah letterhead, the Division of Ethnic Studies. I won't get into the details here, but it's basically kind of what I've been speaking about in the previous slide as well. Not only does the interviewee or the narrator sign off, you sign off, the interviewer signs off on this as well. Okay. Transcribing, transcribed interviews are easier for researchers to use than digital or video recordings. Corrected transcripts may be more accurate and complete because a narrator was still available to clear up obscurities, clarify words, expand on inadequately answered questions. And it's also something tangible and permanent to show for your efforts, okay? Oftentimes, funding agencies want something tangible, so you can provide them, transcripts of oral histories in addition to the audio video, or you may not be able to provide audio video because those files are a lot larger, okay? And this end product has a lot of permanence as well. Transcribing is a lot easier than it was when I first started researching. I remember when I started interviewing, I was using microcassettes. And it would take me about, even using a pedal to help me kind of advance or back up the microcassette, it would still take me about, I think, 3 hours to transcribe 1 hour of audio recording. Okay, so it was very difficult. This here is an image of the Otter AI software package, which is free. Like I'm saying, Zoom's great because it's free and we can do interviews, and you can save those videos onto your desktop or whatever. Otter AI is free. You can upgrade to give you a little bit more capability, but you can see, let me see if I can bring this up a little bit more. Here, where I have different interviews here. And most of these interviews here are Zoom audio video recordings that I upload into this program. And then after you upload it, it says the transcribing process begins. And for instance, this is kind of the beginning excerpt of Albert Garcia's, our national treasure, the interview that I did with him. So I didn't have to do anything other than upload the MP4 audio file. And then this Otter AI provides you it sends you an email to let you know when it's finished, and you go in, and then after it's finished, you can go in and edit, and you'll edit, and it gives you the audio recording right along with the transcription, so you can hear what you need in order to edit. And so now it takes me about 30 minutes to edit a 60 to 90 minute tape or audio recording, which before it would take me, like 3 hours in order to kind of transcribe. And so this is very handy. And even if you, even if you're not using Zoom or video recording, it will do any audio recording. And so this is very handy for you. Again, you can just Google that, Otter AI. And if I have time, I can provide those links a little bit later on, okay? This is kind of pretty much what I wanted to discuss with you. I thought you were gonna be able to get the handouts. And if you do get the handouts, these are live links, and these are other oral history resources to kind of help you out if you decide to do oral histories on your own, or if you decide to work with an organization in order to create a big database. Thanks for listening. And now I'll take any questions, comments, and see if we can generate some more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Yes, we have a question right off the bat, but just before I introduce Hector's, I could cry when you said that there was an application to translate.
Well, it's not translating, it's transcribing.
Transcribe, right.
Yeah,
transcribe.
and that's the downside to Otter AI, that it at least so far, I don't know if there's a program for Spanish. Okay, so that's the only downside to that. It has to be English language, at least the software package that I'm using. I imagine there's one for Spanish language as well. How much it costs, I don't really know. But yeah, okay. So
Hector Islas is saying, Dr. Munoz, would you suggest we start asking questions about the concerns the interviewee may have? Is it a good idea to focus on humor or funny moments in their lives? And what makes an excellent interview? In other words, what is considered a golden interview?
Well, that is, there's no right answer to that. Okay, I think for me, a golden interview is, and let me kind of back up a little bit here. Got too many things open here. Let me see if I can. I want to. I want to share an interview guide, okay? And again, like I mentioned, you kind of have to think about this beforehand, okay? What do you want to talk about? Whether or not you want to make things humorous, I think that just comes out organically through an interview. You may have even people start crying during an interview because they start just through the questions that you are proposing. It may kind of bring out some feelings or an event that happened that was very, kind of traumatic and whatnot. And so you kind of, that just kind of happens organically. You have to be prepared for it, I guess. And what you may want to put in, at the beginning, you might want to tell folks that some of these questions might produce, kinds of feelings that, that could bring up, some emotional things. You don't have to talk about them if you don't want to. All right. And again, this might be a time when individuals might spill their guts on something that happened, and then afterwards they don't want that to be public. And so that's why you give the narrator a chance to edit the transcript as well, if that person wants to take that out of the interview. The humorous stuff will kind of come out as well. And it depends on the person that you're interviewing. And getting back to the golden interview, I think the golden interview is just if you can have a lively conversation with somebody, somebody that's willing to kind of talk to you about different things. And this is the interview guide that we're using. Here's that identifying information that I talked about first, a little bit of demographics up at the beginning, date of birth, place of birth, racial ethnic background. And then, I kind of start in, and can you tell me some about your family history? Again, here's where folks might, talk about some things that are very personal, that bring up, kind of emotional kinds of things or whatever. And they, sometimes, even though it might be traumatic, it might be good for them to talk about it. And so kind of let this, kind of, what do they call it? It's, it helps them to kind of talk about these issues, okay? And not to kind of keep them in all the time as well. Which I think what you kind of have to be prepared for is that just about anything can happen in an interview, okay? There might be somebody that might be combative about a particular question that you're asking. And, you just kind of have to learn how to navigate through that the best you can. Remember, I talked about not being judgmental, okay? Letting individuals voice their perspective. It's not necessarily wrong, you may feel a different way about it, but, do your best to kind of let the narrator talk about it the way they want to talk about it, okay? Of course, you don't have to kind of take any threatening behavior or anything like that. But still, you just kind of listen and let them kind of talk about it, because when you think about it, this is just kind of another perspective, all right? And the next person you interview might have a whole different perspective than the individual that you interviewed, okay? But those are the things that we kind of want to get. Again, a golden interview for me is just somebody that's willing to talk about all of these things, and if they don't talk about all of them, but just having a conversation, a frank conversation, so like I'm saying, these are kinds of things that I talk about, that I'd like for individuals to talk about. And these are some things that could produce some, kind of negative feelings. What have some of the challenges been of living in Utah? Did you experience racial ethnic discrimination? Did you experience gender discrimination? Have you experienced a sexuality discrimination? Okay. Those are some things that could bring up some very kind of troubling times or whatever. And some people may not wish to talk about it. Some people talk about it in different ways. Okay. And so, I don't think there's any kind of, perfect interview. I think you can just hope to get individuals to talk about the certain things that you have kind of set forth in an interview guide. Okay. I don't know if that helps you out or not.
He had another question. You mentioned you have thought a lot about identity terms we use to identify ourselves. Could you elaborate or provide an opinion on the distinction between Chicano, Hispanic, Latin American, Mexicano, etc.? Finally, could you discuss a little bit about your recent project that you published this summer, 2021?
Well, this is kind of basically what that paper was about in terms of, let me move my camera a little bit so I can look. It appears that I'm talking to you all instead of off to the side. Okay. This is something that's been kind of at the forefront for quite some time. I remember when I was an undergraduate, and the big debate then was whether or not you wanted to be called Chicano or Hispanic. And the title of my paper is Why Not Nuevo Mexicano Studies, Interrogating Latinidades in the Intermountain West, 1528 to 2020, okay? And so I kind of lay out this historical kind of presence of Latinos and Latinas dating back from Spanish explorations, starting like in up through Santa Fe, northern Arizona, and those types of things, you know, to kind of provide this kind of Spanish or Hispanic presence. But the Spaniards, as many of you know, they weren't the only ones that came on these expeditions. And the majority of individuals that did come with the Spaniards on these colonizing and exploratory expeditions were mestizos, okay? Mexicans, a lot of indigenous folks, and even Afro-Latinos as well, all right? And so there's a lot of things that go into, you know, this preference for one identity over the other. I do not like the term Hispanic, okay? I don't mind when people call me Hispanic because they don't know why I don't like it, those types of things. And then there's other forces out in society that, you know, kind of allow for the use of this term. And it is kind of the most preferred term within the Chicano, Latino, Hispanic population, whichever term you want to use. There's no real right term, in my opinion. I prefer the term Chicano, and basically because of an ideology that came out of the Chicano movement. I was only 10 years old when that stuff was going on, but I learned a lot about it. And, you know, for me, I might have mentioned this earlier on, you know, I'm kind of progressive in my ideas, and I'd rather kind of ensure that individuals are, you know, it's a just society, socially, politically, and economically for all communities and not just one particular community. And that's kind of an ideology that goes along with the term Chicano. Not everybody knows about that, though, okay? There's other individuals that might equate a Chicano with, you know, gangbangers, you know, and that, you know, kind of perception is out there as well. The reason I don't like Hispanic is that it gives this preference to a Spanish identity, which hasn't really been my experience. And to give you another example, the Spanish European identity, and the Spanish, particularly European identity, is one of privilege here in the United States. And, you know, today, even just today, you know, the way Latinos are treated, whether you call yourself Hispanic or Chicano, first thing they're going to think is that you're an undocumented immigrant, okay? And that's kind of the way that the rhetoric has been for the past, you know, decade or so. And, you know, and there's all kinds of things that go into that. You know, my young daughter, and it impacts us, the way people talk about us in the media, the way, you know, other people within our communities talk about it. My daughter, who is going to be 13 now, and when Trump was running for president, she asked me if we were going to have to move to Mexico if Trump won the presidency, just because of the rhetoric. And that's what, she was like 8 years old at the time. All right, so there's a difference. So in other words, you know, if I was a European, okay, I probably wouldn't be getting that treatment, and my daughters wouldn't have to deal with that so much. All right, but they know that they're Mexican, Latina, Chicana, or whatever, because of their upbringing with me as well. You know, so that's why, you know, and to me, the other thing about Chicanos is, and it, you know, also came out of the movement, is, you know, it was a term to kind of, you know, acknowledge the working class history of the Mexican population in the United States, which is primarily what Mexicans have done. And even today, you'll see a lot of the, you know, labor positions are being filled by Latinos and Latinas, okay? I recently, you know, had my house painted. The painter was Mexican, all right? He spoke English very well, but he asked me if I spoke Spanish just because of my last name. But he could also tell that I was, you know, a privileged Latino because I lived in the bigger house and was paying somebody to paint their bedrooms and things like that, you know. And then I had some people come in and do flooring. These young guys were like mid-20s and could barely speak English. But we got along, we joked around, we had a good time, and, you know, and so, but there's these things, common things that bring us together. and then there's other things that kind of keep us apart as well. Language abilities kind of keep us apart as well, but you have to kind of talk through them. Like I said, Hispanic, I personally don't like the term. If other people want to use that term, I'm perfectly fine with that as well. So for me, there's no real right or wrong term. And today the term is Latinx. Okay. And so I spend like a whole class period on these labels when I'm teaching my classes. So we could go on forever. So hopefully that's okay.
Well, Ed, we're at the 5-minute mark where they're going to cut us off. But in terms of a handout that you spoke of, how would you like people to respond to that if they want one? Should they email you or?
Well, yeah, I saw in the chat in the main room,
Yeah,
that Tom had posted a link to the slides, but when I clicked on the link, I didn't see my slides there. I just saw the slides for the Galicia. Somebody's presenting on New Nueva Galicia.
yeah.
Yeah, and so I just saw that, and so I would suggest that Tom just email it to, like when they've been emailing the link to the different to the schedule. If they could just send the PDF file to that, I think that would be one way to do it.
Okay, so
Or let me put my email in here.
now you said Tom has already your slides in.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the last sheet that you showed with questions, is that part of your handouts?
Yes.
Okay.
With the resources.
Yeah. I get it.
But the questions are not part of that handout, but I could make those available as well.
That'll be great.
Okay.
I think that's really useful. And let me think for a second.
Yeah, okay, I just put my email in there. If you would like a copy of the slides, just email me and I'll send those to you as well. And you can also let me know if you'd like the interview guide. And I can send that to you. And this is something we developed with my students, okay?
Mhm.
You all, depending on the purpose of your or objectives of your oral histories, you may want to change this interview guide. Sorry, but yeah. So I see another question here. Dr. Munoz, would you attempt to put the interviewee at ease with coffee, pastries, food? I would stay away from the alcohol. All right, because then alcohol makes it's just kind of unpredictable with what alcohol can do. But it depends on where you're at. With regards to coffee, coffee, pastries. If you go to somebody's house, I'm sure they'll probably offer you coffee or whatever. I know I'm always offering people something if they come to my house or whatever. I would stay away from the alcohol though. Certainly the interviewer, but and even the interviewee as well. Okay. And I heard the use of Latina over Latinx. Yes, I've noticed that as well. And Latina is another way, Latina is another way to kind of non-gender the term Latino, okay? And Latinx, I like the term Latinx, even though it's not used by a lot, and, because it kind of, recognizes our gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans brothers and sisters in our community as well. And so that's why I really like that term. We're running out of time with that. Again, there's no real, you can ask me for the article as well if you want. Yes. I can send you the article as well. Okay? So good. Yeah. Any other last questions? Do we have time or not?
No, we are totally out of time. And thank you, Ed, and to everyone who's attended.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.